action. I can't get no call to action, but I try, and I try, and I try, and I try.
Hello and welcome to Call to Action, the go-to podcast for anyone trying to make sense of the world of marketing, advertising and beyond. In an industry that is a minefield of utter bollocks, we aim to capture our heroes and allies from the front line to have a chin-wag with. It's like Pokemon Go, with the single but vital exception that it's not a short-term bandwagon of shite. It's brought to you by Gasp, and I'm Giles Edwards, co-founder and MD. Today, I've caught Brian Macreadie. Brian's stellar career includes a period as marketing director for media and sport at Getty Images, marketing communication roles at a number of large telecoms companies such as AT&T, and over 12 years' experience as head of marketing at several international law firms. With more medals than Ryan Giggs, Brian has over 60 prestigious B2B industry awards, including the Grand Prix for Marketing Campaign of the Year at the International B2B Marketing Awards in 2018. Brian says, the most important thing in any marketer's arsenal is customer insight. Spend more time really getting to know customers, spend more time with salespeople, and don't take no for an answer when you've got a good idea. Welcome to the show, Brian.
Hello, mate. Thanks very much for having me on here.
Right, quick fire questions, Brian. Mac or PC?
Yeah, Mac.
Football or rugby?
Football.
What team?
You're not going to want to interview me after this. I'm Liverpool Football Club.
Let's not talk Champions League then. Shit.
No, let's part that, right?
Yeah, right, easy one. B2B or B2C?
Yeah, B2B.
Ritson or Sharp?
Or was that a trick question? Aren't we all meant to say Binet and Field these days? You got to go Ritson, right?
Yeah, okay. Independent or network?
Ooh, jeez. Independent
is the correct answer. Be different or be distinct?
Be different.
And lastly, the long or the short?
You're not getting me on that one, both.
Well played. So, Brian, what was your first job and what was your first proper marketing job? How did it all start?
Right, you're gonna completely take the mick out of me on this one, but I've been a bit of a grafter all the way since school. I had a job all the way through school and all the way through university, pretty much. My first job, I was in a butcher's shop in a big supermarket in South London where I grew up. This is one I'm going to just out myself as a complete nerd. But yeah, so my master plan was I was going to be Luke Skywalker. Really, genuinely, that was the plan. And the closest I was going to get to it was going to be an astronaut. So no joke, I went off and did a degree in physics, majored on astrophysics. I got a job working in the defence sector, writing some pretty secretive physics-based software. Signed the Official Secrets Act quite a bit. But the first chance I got sent on a business trip to Washington, and I snuck off, got on a plane, went down to Florida and tried to get a job as an astronaut at NASA. No joke. And it was just an incredibly naive attempt because I turned up at the tourist centre, not in Houston, where the actual NASA is based. and they sent me packing. But I did try, but I came back to London. I didn't have a green card. I didn't have a mission specialism. They gave me some pretty good advice, and I almost did a PhD at Oxford. But a kind of strange thing happened to me back in my job back in the UK, working in the defence sector, that I actually found that I was better with customers and with clients than I was at code and at physics. And they started putting me into more client-facing situations, started working on pitching. They sent me off on a few courses by the Chartered Institute of Marketing, and this kind of light bulb went on. Literally, I just thought, oh, bingo, I literally love this. And promptly moved jobs to a big telecom brand called AT&T in the States. And that was a really supportive environment. They gave me all sorts of marketing training, lots of business training. So I spent time in sales, spent time in product development, did work in business analysis, marcoms, and the rest is history. I've never looked back, been in marketing ever since. So yeah, a bit of a strange journey, really.
And has it always been in the B2B environment?
Yeah, I'd love to say that it was a plan, but I remember sitting there in the foyer and some folks got sent down the B2C corridor, and some went down the B2B, and that was what basically chose my destiny. And you know, really have taken to it. I really enjoy it. So yeah, I've never looked back.
So B2B in particular, then, if we focus on that, has a often unfair, I would stress, reputation as being quite a sterile space. Is that true in your experience?
No, not in the slightest. In fact, I'm fairly well known for telling people that think that to kiss my ass, actually. But yeah, I mean, it's obviously, it doesn't feel as glamorous as B2C, right? You know, you talk to people in bars and at pubs, and they've never heard of most of the brands that we work for, and you know, so it's easy to be dismissive of it. But the kind of the way I looked at it very early on in my career was, you kind of start realizing that almost every single thing that's in an office or in a plane or in a hospital or in a football stadium or in an airport or a school or a film set has kind of been put there by a B2B supplier. And, you know, the things that almost every company or agency on the planet needs to survive and to thrive, like people, money, IT, carpets, websites, you name it, contract support, again, was delivered by a B2B supplier. And really, I think where it clicked for me is that you suddenly realize, you know, behind every single one of those things is a fellow human being with worries and with needs and with problems and with ambitions. And B2B, all we do is we're just there to help those humans to succeed and to overcome their worries. And you know, I don't want to denigrate B2C. You know, I'm a big fan of B2C. You know, folks in B2C, they get to work with carpets and toothpaste and lawnmowers and you know, you name it. But we get to work with aircraft and skyscrapers and movie special effects and MRI scanners and stuff. So, you know, I've done a lot of great work in my career with NFL teams and Olympics and huge tech companies and stuff. And I just think there's more to it than meets the eye in B2B. There's a lot of emotion. There's a lot of human needs. I genuinely don't think there's anything boring about B2B. I just think, you know, there's no boring products, just boring brands. But you know, I think it's pretty good space. I love it. I've had a great career in it. You know, one of the things that I've noticed, I'm pretty fortunate. I get to see, you know, I've been a judge at the B2B Marketing Awards a number of times. You know, I network quite heavily in the industry. So, you know, most of us don't get to see a lot of the good B2B stuff that goes on out there, because it's very, you know, it's targeted at very niche communities. You know, great campaigns for MRI scanners are only ever targeted at people that are in the market for MRI scanners. The rest of us will never see it. Same with people that are buying aircraft fleets. You know, the rest of us would never see it. So you do have to go and look quite hard for the great examples out there. But, you know, there's people out there using gnomes to sell scientific equipment, and there's people using really heavy doses of innuendo to sell air conditioning units, and there's people doing supersized Jenga with industrial diggers. You know, my teams have done mental stuff with you know, the Stig and with stilt walkers and sponge fish. I've had fully chromed spades land on my desk. There's a huge amount, and I think one of the challenges for my fellow marketers is sometimes we just don't get enough of that stimulus, and we don't get to see enough that inspires us to take that into our careers. And, you know, I think there's other impediments, there's other barriers put in marketers' way to try new things. But you're absolutely right. There's a huge amount of creativity out there, and I think it's got just oodles of untapped potential. I think it's a great industry for creatives too. I think there's so much to be done.
Do you have a favourite campaign?
Do you know, I always, I've got, yeah, there's loads. I mean, everyone in our industry in B2B, you know, everyone really looks up to the whole Jean-Claude Van Damme epic split, you know, because, you know, that was one of the crossover ones that the general public got to see. You know, I've done quite a lot that I'm really proud of, that my team have really done, that's brave and different, and we've won some awards. But I guess one of my favourites ever, I'm going to go back to that Gnomes one, where it was, you know, a little company that sells weighing scales and other stuff to academia. And you know, you might instantly think, God, weighing scales, that doesn't sound that exciting. But this one company, they're called Kern, their weighing scales were so sensitive. They sent a gnome to all over the world, South Pole, middle of the Amazon jungle, you know, the deserts of North Africa and stuff, and they weighed this gnome on their weighing scales, and the weighing scales were so sensitive that they proved that the Earth isn't a sphere. You know, and I was just thinking, and the amount of coverage that they got for that, the amount of interest they got from science departments, from schools that buy this kind of stuff, was literally off the charts. It helped transform their income. And who'd have thought it? Using gnomes to prove the Earth isn't sphere, and there's literally loads of stuff out there that you kind of get to see. Actuarial businesses doing really crazy stuff on Facebook. I just think there's loads, and I don't think the problem is marketers, or lack of creativity. I think there's things like we have to work on our persuasion skills to help sell these ideas into our business, really. But yeah, just unbridled, untapped potential, I think.
You mentioned you network a lot with other B2B marketers. What are the main pressures you're all currently facing?
I guess we're not police officers and nurses, we're not on the front lines, so the pressures in our world are different from other people. But there is a lot of pressure, and it's interesting. What I guess you read in the media, there's a lot of coverage about latest data and digital techniques and stuff. Actually, most CMOs you talk to, 99% of the time, we're really focused on revenue and growth. So, what you might pick up in Campaign magazine or online is not what it's really like on the shop floor. I think we are all mainly focused on priorities. But yeah, it's the usual stuff that everyone in B2C and B2B kind of gets. We're worried about our budgets and deadlines and competitors and relentless need to stand out. We've got teams to hire and motivate. We've got management reports and boards to talk to. There's all of those usual pressures, but I think B2B has got its own specifics. Things that me and my fellow marketers, I guess, struggle with. The pressure of working face to face with salespeople, and that can get pretty bruising if they're missing their target and not going to get their commission payments. That's I'm not sure if it's unique to B2B, but it's a pressure. Just talking about the clients, we have procurement teams we've got to get through. There's multiple stakeholders that in business buying decisions. So we have to communicate with a lot of people, and for a lot of them, they don't want to switch. It's a hassle or a risk to switch providers, and so trying to convince and persuade people to try something new is massive. A lot of us have only got a few hundred target clients or customers in our market, so you have to fight really, really hard. So there's a lot of pressure, but the biggest one, I guess, really is just. Everyone knows that we live in the age of accountability, and there's relentless, unbridled kind of pressure again on proving our worth and KPIs, and it drives a lot of short-termism. Really, a lot of my fellow marketers are getting hit, with hard monthly and quarterly targets, and the long term gets lost in that noise. It's complicated, and it doesn't help when there's academics out there moaning about or arguing about whether it's distinctive or differentiated. Most of us in the trench are hitting our quarterly numbers. Semantics about word choice is not top of our worry list, really.
And how can you navigate that? How can you navigate that need for immediate short-term results when you know you need an eye on the long term?
I mean, the first thing, you have to keep hitting your short-term results, because if you're not, you're under pressure. So it is largely unavoidable. But, I think a lot of us, it's incumbent on a lot of us to start educating our companies and educating our peers and our colleagues in our businesses about the need for, at least some kind of investment in the long term. I think the work that Binet and Field have done recently is really, really helpful in that. I think it would be more helpful if there were more case studies in B2B of how brands have helped grow themselves. But I spend an inordinate amount of time. I've been doing nothing else actually for about the last 8 weeks on internal education and just helping people understand how you really win preference in the market. How do you build a reputation? How do you earn the trust of buyers? How do you build desire and demand in the market? So I think there's a big need for education. I don't think there's been enough of that historically. There's been a bit too much short-term stuff and inevitably quite a lot of focus on data and digital, I guess.
We talked about this briefly before recording, and there's certainly a link to short-termism and prioritising activation channels and the associated expectations being applied to all marketing activity. But given a B2B sales cycle can last years, it becomes vital to measure not just conversions, but every stage from awareness to consideration and beyond. How can you do that?
I've always felt it's important. Sometimes it's surprising me when you bump into people that don't think it's important. Indeed, this week I shared around on Twitter a report by a business called Annuitas. They interviewed a bunch of CEOs and other C-suite members, and one of their findings was very much that they think that brand-focused marketers are focusing on the wrong things, and by inference, they should be focused much more on immediate sales targets. So there is kind of a huge amount of pressure on it, but I think there's leading and there's lagging indicators of health and success. There's how we're doing right now, and revenue and sales is a lagging factor. You do have to look at, well, what's our business health like in the market, and our propensity to attract future income, and lead pipeline is a great leading indicator. But I think things like top of mind awareness and favorability and sentiment of your brand is important. I think it's just a balance of getting long-term and short-term metrics in place. I think balance is something I try and focus on and make sure I don't sway too heavily one way or the other. It's interesting. You talked about long-term stuff. So I was recently last year working on a really big campaign around construction disputes. And if there's a big, huge energy company, for example, that has something goes wrong and they get into a dispute with somebody over a big construction contract, this could be worth tens or hundreds of millions of dollars, perhaps. You can't nurture somebody towards having a construction dispute. You've just got to be top of mind with the client if something goes wrong. Who's the first person they're going to pick up the phone to, and you want to be that person. So there is a need in long-term cycles. You do have to be top of mind. So I try and get a balance in my KPI list of long-term and short-term stuff.
It's easy to understand why we are where we are, though, really, not least from a short-termism perspective, because being a very talented marketer isn't in its own right sufficient, because you need to navigate all of the complexities that come with a board with various stakeholders involved in the sign-off, and everything is pointing to short-term results. And we could probably fill a podcast episode or series, in fact, looking into all the detail around that and why short-termism arises, and whether it's down to length of tenure and quarterly results and quarterly objectives. But it's challenging, and these are the conditions that marketers are working within.
Yeah, I tell you what, I've got an interesting little anecdote. This impressions, they never leave you. My first ever, I guess what it's called a proper marketing job. I was about 26, joined AT&T, and got sent off to a big annual sales conference. So I don't know what it's like in B2C. I don't know how the big sales conferences, but a lot of B2B brands, anyone that's not working off e-commerce usually has a big sales force, and they're your typically number one internal client, and you have to have a good aligned relationship with them. And I remember naively going off to this first sales conference. I'd only been in the job a few weeks, I seem to recall, and I was asked to do a presentation about the product roadmap for the year or something, and naively was too inexperienced at that point to have sat there and had a look at what was the sales team's compensation plans look like, how far off their number were they as individuals. And so I proudly got up on stage, had some exciting news about some of the new products that we were about to launch throughout the year, and got about one sentence into it before somebody stood up and started calling me an effing C.
Wow. At
the top of their voice. About 600 people sitting there, and a whole bunch of them weren't going to hit their commission targets, and they were worried about mortgage payments and lack of income and stuff, because they felt our pricing was off, and they didn't feel that they could compete with their rivals. And what the F was I going to do about it, you effing C? And I remember, suddenly realizing in that environment, the pressure to hit numbers directly affects people's lives. It affects your shareholders. It impacts what the media say about you, and that pressure is kind of palpable. I've sat in one business, I won't say which, but where we were having a tricky time, and I was asked by the CEO to sit on an investor relations call, and you just realise how brutal it is when these guys are asking you big tricky questions about what are you going to do to turn around your revenue slump, and that pressure is very, very real on marketers, and sometimes people don't kind of focus on that. again, we're not nurses and surgeons and doctors and teachers, but there are pressures with it, and we can't ever lose sight of that short-term stuff.
What then, off the record, and by off the record I mean going out on a podcast, do you client-side marketers really think of us lot operating agency side, broadly speaking?
So I love working with agencies, and I'd always assumed that everybody in my industry felt the same way. But it was a little while ago, I co-chaired with actually with the CMO of British Land. We co-chaired a night. There was about 30 fairly senior B2B marketers there, and we asked that very question: what do people feel about agencies? And we wrote it up. We could probably share the link. I think I sent it to you a little while ago, actually, Giles. But it was remarkable that literally 50-50, exactly 50-50, 50% of the marketers in the room saying that they just would rather not work with agencies, they'd rather in-house everything. And the other 50% said we'd rather send more to agencies. And it was really quite polarized. So I use agencies as much as possible. I've probably got about 4 or 5 different agencies doing work for me as we speak. But I don't think everybody feels that way. And it's quite surprising. It's probably try and be helpful. Well, why is that? We try to understand why is that, and there's a multitude of reasons. Yeah, from the basic, some people have big budgets, and some people have small. Some have big in-house teams, and some have small. There's so different people are in a different position. Some people are startups, and some people are hugely established market-leading brands. And again, so everybody has kind of different needs and different experiences. But I remember there was one thing that really stood with me, and I think I can relate to it, is that marketing budgets that we have to play with are discretionary budgets. They can be taken away or they can be added to, depending upon how companies are doing. And if you've got an in-house team, it's typically companies think a lot harder about cutting back spend on in-house teams than they do. It's very easy to just say to an agency, "Oh, look, we have to cut back a little bit. We'll see you next year." It's much easier to stop doing work with agencies than it is to stop doing work with your in-house team. So that wasn't my view. That was just a finding of talking to these 30 or so senior B2B marketers. So it was just interesting. There was very different views about it, which was quite surprising, I think.
Yeah, you did send me that link, by the way. So to everyone listening, that has been shared. And if you just head over to the episode, you'll be able to enjoy that summary also. Was any of that your inspiration behind that wonderful poem you published last year? I didn't open your email. The headline totally sucked.
I had a bit of fun with that. Yeah, that seemed to go down quite well. Yeah, it's there's a lot. I get approached. I'm sure everybody in business, your inbox is full of stuff that people are trying to sell you something or cut through diary, and I love looking at my inbox because it tells me the state of the nation about how is marketing doing out there, and last 95% of it's pretty poor. A lot of it, and just to put it in context, whether it's market research businesses.
Before you do, we can listen to and enjoy that poem if you like.
Go, all right, go for it.
I didn't open your email. The headline totally sucked. Dear B2B brands, please forgive me. I'm not being rude. I don't want you to fester or brood. I'm not being difficult, nor tough, nor defeatist. I don't want you to feel ignored or mistreated. It's just that I'm busy. I'm hectic. I'm swamped. And your email didn't grab me. Didn't act as a prompt. It got lost in the noise. It got masked by the crowd. It sat there quite hushed, not shouting loud. For my inbox has become a dire, endless battle. 200 plus emails a day rubbing shoulders like cattle. I just haven't the time to read through them all. I've got too much on to trawl through the sprawl. I've other things to do, other things on the go, like hitting my objectives, priorities, So unless your mail's opening line is just right, you're going to have to get used to a fright. Your email is just noise, just wallpaper to me, like a tiny drop of water in a vast open sea. There's only one way to swim and not sink, only one way to ensure your click-throughs don't stink. And that's to make sure the benefits I'll get are laid out, super clear from the very outset. For the art of persuasion is based on one thing, and that's knowing the value that you truly bring. How your product or service will improve my life, my problems you'll solve, how you'll end my strife. Which means focusing on the challenges I face and bringing me ideas to put them in their place. Your unmissable offer is all about you. And frankly, quite bluntly, I couldn't give a poo. Don't talk about yourself or the cool things you do. That's not the way to achieve cut-through. Just send me something personal, full of empathy, and never forget to articulate what's in it for me.
No,
It's a great poem.
Oh my! I'm quite embarrassed listening back to that. What was Samuel L. Jackson not available to read that back or something?
Well, I do have to thank our friend of the show, Ollie Mines, who is the Barry White of the copywriting
Thank
world.
you, Ollie. Oh man, that's thrown me.
Sorry, it was a last minute thing, Brian. It wasn't on the agenda. Apologies, but it's, to be fair, I think it's a masterclass. Really, it really is. It's short and sweet, and there's so many good points in there. Mostly, it's all about you. Focus on, how do you improve my life? We see it with, everyone, as you'd expect. We see it with clients and agencies that just talk about themselves, and it's clearly not the right approach.
Most of the stuff I get is, we'd love to pop in and see you, and would you like to see our portfolio, or can we have a call, please? And it sounds a bit, it might sound a bit evil me saying this, but if I'm buying creativity from people, I want to see a bit of creativity up front, and everyone that gets through my door, and I do see a lot of people are the ones where I think there's a little bit of invention gone into it, because that's, I think, ultimately what I'm buying. Of course, there's people that aren't in the creative spheres. There's a lot of people with sort of great technology out there, and sometimes I just need a translator or a piece of market research doing. So not everything needs some invention, but yeah, there's a lot of fairly uninspiring stuff that hits not just me. I'm sure everybody on the podcasts experiences that. But just one little trick. I mean, one thing that I always do, and I hope my colleagues will back me up on this, I almost start every single campaign, every single marketing project that we do here. I've got this slide of what a busy inbox looks like, and it's just wall-to-wall emails, and the simple starting question, just looking at that, is just remind people, right, that's the customer. How are we cutting through that lot? Or sometimes I'll show people's busy diaries and just say, how are we going to cut through that lot? I always really loved that Stephen Pressfield book, was it Nobody Wants to Read Your Shit or something? And I always use that as inspiration to make me think, right, what am I going to do here that's going to make anybody give a damn about what I've got to say? It works for me as a starting point, and I'd love to know what other people's tricks are, but that's always my starting point here. That simple, what's the human cut-through moment.
There's a great ad, and if you haven't seen it, I will send it to you, but I believe McGraw-Hill, who by coincidence we did some work with recently, they ran this ad in the 50s or 60s, man in the chair, and he says, I don't know who you are, I don't know your company, I don't know your company's product, I don't know what your company stands for. I don't know your company's customers. I don't know your company's record. I don't know your company's reputation. Now, what was it you wanted to sell me? And to me, that's just a fantastic way of thinking what mindset customers will likely be in when seeing your ads. It's that whole state of indifference, which I think is one of the biggest obstacles we face as marketers.
Yeah, it's. I think for me, it sits really at the heart of the kind of recent marketing challenge where, I don't want to sound like a Luddite. I use data and technology and digital channels at the heart of everything I do. They're just incredibly useful tools, just source of information. I couldn't imagine doing any work without one. But, and it's a big but, I think that on their own, they really don't do anything for you on their own. They're just tools, and ultimately we've got to go out there and earn somebody's attention and persuade them to respond to us somehow, to capture their imagination and to inspire them and to build desire. And really creativity, I think, has always been at the heart of that, and I don't think we live in a world where it's creativity or digital and data and tech. I think the two of them have to live in happy harmony, right? But I think there's been a bit too much focus on one and not enough focus on the old school arts of creativity and persuasion and focusing on response. So that's why I kind of fixate on it a little bit, I guess.
You mentioned earlier about educating people, whether I'm assuming you're talking about your internal teams. How do you go about doing that? And are there any freely available resources that you use that you can share with our listeners?
I don't think there's anything rocket science to it. It's just an investment of time. And so, I think the Binet&Field recent B2B data is, really helpful. There was a Google, I think Google and the CEB did a survey which showed that stronger brands, I think that they spoke to several hundred or maybe even 1,000 buyers of business services, business decision makers, and they said that, stronger brands out there are more likely to get considered and purchased and less likely to get a price discount pressure. There was I think an article that McKinsey did that showed that creativity was a business superpower. I can't remember the exact wording, but anything that McKinsey put out or anything that Harvard Business Review put out about creativity always works really well in B2B. Hugely credible. Yeah. I just like to show other brave stuff that other people are doing, just to remind people, my colleagues, that we're not alone. Everyone else is out there doing it, and I guess probably the most useful tool is just to remind people that our rivals are out there making noise. They're out there doing great stuff, and use that little anxiety that we don't just want to sound and look exactly like other people and hide in amongst the crowd. We just don't want to do that. That usually helps people think, well, okay, what are we going to do that's a bit different? But it's we're professional communicators. We think about this stuff all the time, and I guess business people around us in whatever industry don't think about it as much as we do. So I think it's just sharing our points of view, really, and just always relating it back to the imperatives of customers and growth and income, really. As long as you don't put it in the colours and fonts box, you're probably going to do okay.
Your point about McKinsey championing creativity, I think it's fair to say, certainly from the guests that we've had on the show, that the consensus is that creativity is starting to return back to where it was in a lot of people's minds, and given the significance that it deserves, that maybe was lost. I think, understandably, the explosion of all these new fancy tools that have arrived in the last few years clearly takes attention away, and until you thoroughly use them and test them and see what's what and actually conclude from the results you see, you can't accurately say this works or this doesn't.
Yeah, I think so. It's just about that balance. It was interesting. I went to B2B Ignite, which is the biggest B2B marketing conference in Europe. It's an annual thing, and I went to that recently. It was really interesting because for the first time in a little while in any kind of marketing conference I've been to, big ideas started making a re-emergence. There were 2 or 3 sessions dedicated to people coming up with big ideas. And I hadn't heard that in a few years, in fairness. I mean, there was the usual other stuff to balance it out around, people talking about DevOps, not quite sure what that is, and programmatic use of intent data. But, it was pretty cool because for the first time, I think in a while, it felt that there were multiple different inputs. And I think if we can get, in the industry, a few more people reminding ourselves of how pricing strategy works or how you build a positioning in the market, just a little bit more. And I think we'll be back in good times. I'm ever the optimist, right?
We have a couple of listener questions I'd like to put your way, if I may, Brian.
Yeah.
Now, asking the general public for their opinion, be it on Brexit or boat names, is notoriously fraught with danger, but that's not stopped us asking. Starting with Rob, who has told us he works in B2B, and Rob has asked, and it's quite relevant given what we've just been discussing, have we reached a snake oil digital marketing tipping point yet?
Wow. So no, not a chance. No, I think other disciplines are starting to come back. I mentioned just a moment ago the thing about people focusing on big ideas. There's more focus on brand now. I think the Binet&Field recent B2B piece is going to be helpful for that. But really, it's here to stay. You know, I couldn't imagine doing anything these days that didn't have some token level of or some input from data, from technology, from digital. I just can't imagine it. You know, really, and I think where it becomes a problem are the somewhat excessive folks out there that claim, you know, their way is the only way, and old, you know, they denigrate what they call traditional tactics and techniques and stuff. You know, I think there's still a lot of those folks out there, and it's easy to be seduced by them. You know, they're promising to cut waste, they're promising, you know, super efficiency, talking to the right people at the right time. But you know, my response to them is, you know, Lee Clow, that, you know, the really famous advertising guy, you know, he had that expression, you know, producing excrement efficiently doesn't make the end product any less odious.
Yeah, right.
You know, I love that expression, and you know, I think people that think digital is the only way forward and aren't investing in other aspects of product development, pricing, positioning, creativity, and the like, I think they're missing something, honestly, and I don't think they're helping my fellow marketers. I don't think they're giving my my peers good advice. I keep coming back to balance, right? I sound like Yoda.
No, you're absolutely right. And as you say, they're often quite compelling, these guys selling this stuff. So
I'm going to go with the whole Star Wars theme, but I'm on one now. But I remember there was I watched the Star Wars films with my kids recently, and Obi-Wan Kenobi, just about before he's about to beast Darth Vader in whatever the third film was called, he said, you know, only the Sith deal in absolutes. You know, we all know that the Sith are a complete bunch of tossers, right? So, you know, I think anyone that's telling you their way is the only way, I think you've got to just take it with a pinch of salt, right? And anyone that said the old ways are dead, it gets to me a little bit, I guess.
Yeah, and I don't know if I'm right or not, but I feel you have to be a certain age to see through that. Certainly a younger me is a bit more revolutionary and thinks, yeah, it's all about this, but you know, that's just a process, really, isn't it? Maybe that's a maturity thing as well.
Possibly, yeah. I'm a bit of an old warhorse, right? So
I wasn't pointing any fingers, by the way. I meant in my.
No. I think, you know, being more experienced kind of helps, and you know, I guess it's different if you've grown up in an economy that's dictated by LinkedIn and Google and Facebook and stuff. You know, I think inevitably you're going to have different inputs. It was interesting. I think I feel very, very fortunate at the start of my career, and this is not me, you know, going back to old school values or anything, but I do feel very fortunate in my career when I started out that I spent as much time working on pricing or product development than I ever did working on marketing communications. And I think that I always felt really fortunate by having that investment. You know, I spent years on pricing and years on product development, and I feel now when I see a client problem or when I see a business problem that we're facing and we want marketing to help overcome, I don't instantly reach for communications, and I certainly don't reach exclusively only for tech-enabled ones. I try and think, well, is actually the underlying problem a pricing one, or indeed have we got to redevelop our product or bolt something onto it or go and buy a rival, you know? And I wish for my peers and my fellow marketers that they got a little bit more rounded inputs on some of those wider disciplines.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, Ritson talks about the, you know, communication and tactification of marketing, and I think the story you just shared has enabled you to see past that.
Yeah, he'd be proud of me, by the way. We just spent, my team and I did nothing for about 6 weeks a few months ago, but Diagnosis just went through all of our numbers and all of the market research data we had, and we didn't do a thing until we sat and mulled it over. He'd be proud of me.
Amazing. Well, do you know what? That's music to my ears. We've just been through that process for a client, and certainly from an agency side, if you're the one facilitating that type of diagnosis, it would be interesting to know your thoughts on this. Actually, I think it can be quite frustrating. It's a bit like getting a website developed. You get all the aesthetic stuff and all the sexy UI, UX, and whatever. When it goes into development, however, the client doesn't see anything often for weeks on end. And I think that research and diagnosis period is similar in that respect.
Yeah, I mean, thinking about it in hindsight, the question you asked earlier on about, you know, education, there's nothing like evidence and hard facts and numbers to help persuade colleagues about the courses of action that we might want to take, and of course that's where data is absolutely invaluable, right? And I'll take issue with anyone that denigrates kind of data. I know there's been probably people talking about big data too much, but it's just information, and it gives us evidence, and it's gold internally. So in fairness, again, I genuinely, in B2B, I think the marketing industry is pretty good at audit and diagnosis and using data these days. I think they're doing really, really, really good job with it, my peer group.
Yeah, well, certainly from our side, we do talk to clients about the need for research, and we do regularly talk to clients and prospective clients who are sitting on a wealth of research and giving it the attention it deserves. So I think that's a great thing. So Stephanie, who is a student in Bournemouth, a student of marketing and advertising, so she has asked if, Brian, you have any tips for briefing agencies.
Yeah, I guess. So I laugh because I probably think I might ask agencies that same question. You might want to answer, give your version of it, Giles. But
yeah, I'll follow.
I always kind of take that. What was it? That Rudyard Kipling quote. I'm never going to get it right. Who his friends are questions. Who, what, why, where. That kind of thing. I won't get the right quote, but I always just just write down some simple questions in the brief. What are we trying to achieve? Who is buying it? What are their motivations? What problem are we solving for them? What are we selling? Why should they believe us? What impediments do we need to overcome? How do we reach them? What do we want them to do when they've seen our communications, and how we know if we've been successful? I'm sure I've missed some stuff, but it's lots of who's, what's, and where's. Just answer some questions for the agency. I know one thing that, and my peer group and I, we admit we get this wrong quite often, is I think where B2B marketers, I think sometimes I see us making mistakes. I know I'm absolutely guilty of it. Just stick with me for a moment. Is where you get too prescriptive with agencies, and you go in and you almost present them with the answer and say, I want this doing, and I want it on that channel, and it narrows their options. So I think we sometimes get too prescriptive, too narrow, and I think we should just go back and answer some big questions. Although saying that, I just briefed somebody yesterday, and I gave them the answer. So I need to look at myself in the mirror and sort my life out. I don't know if I've answered your question. Giles, what do you think from an agency point of view? What do you think?
Keep it simple. It's hard to do, but it shows that the client has thought hard about the problem. We're blessed with clients at the moment who all seem to know how to give a good brief, but I've come across numerous times the client who perhaps isn't sure of what they're asking an agency to do or achieve, and consequently don't do the hard thinking and just chuck everything they've got at you, leaving the agency with a mountain of material to try and understand, and B, a lot of ambiguity about what the brief actually is. So try and do as much as you can before passing it over to the agency. Who are we targeting? And not only who are we targeting, who are we not targeting? Because again, that shows the client truly understands what they're trying to achieve and with who. And then what's our objective, or what's the objective? These people we're targeting, what are we asking them to do? Because presumably it's something, and it might be as primitive as visit a landing page or arrange a meeting, or it could be a bit more direct and there's some type of offer. What's the call to action? What's our position in the market, and all of our brand associations we want to come across? And lastly, something that often gets missed actually is how do we judge success? What criteria are you, the client, going to use to judge whether we've done this properly or not? There's a great article, a great blog from Dave Trott. If you Google Dave Trott, the binary brief, it's a really nice, simple guide of how to brief.
Yeah, I think it's all good. I couldn't agree more with that. I mean, the number one question that's pervaded most of the top few questions that always pervaded my career. I mean, you mentioned right at the top of the show, about the customer insight is what value are we really creating? What's the problem that we're absolutely solving here? Which is just a different way. Why should anyone care what we've got to say? And then the second one is, why should anyone choose us, really? And if I don't know the answer to that, I start worrying. And that's what, if I don't have a question, an answer, I try and go and find one or build one. There's that thing about in B2B that it's a big deal for your customer to switch brands. It's a big deal to switch agencies, or to switch your aircraft manufacturer, or to switch, the office that you lease. It's a big deal. There's all sorts of risk, and we have to, as B2B suppliers, we have to have a pretty good answer to why would anybody switch and come to us. How are we going to persuade somebody to overcome those risks? And that real deep-rooted emotion of it's risky to swap people. If we focus on that risk and what are we going to do to overcome that risk in the minds of the potential client or customer, then at least it gives you, it's a good starting point for all your marketing activities. I think it serves me okay.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think that's a very valid and brilliant point, really. And it's not easy. I mean, aside from the risk, which of course itself is probably the most significant thing, it's also there's so much friction. It's not easy to switch provider, even after you've decided to. There's all sorts of onboarding processes and procedures, and getting added to supplier lists and due diligence and all sorts of hurdles to get past. Added reason why it has to be compelling, and it has to be clearly communicated.
Yeah, definitely.
So now we come to the final part of our interview, Brian, which is our 4 pertinent posers. So
Okay.
Our usual questions are, number 1, what advice would you give to your younger self, your younger Luke Skywalker self?
Beware the Sith, they're evil. Yeah, I don't know. I wish I had been an astronaut, in fairness. I'm a bit pissed at myself. But yeah, I've loved my career. But yeah, the easy one for me, just spend more time with customers. All day long, spend more time with customers.
Yeah, that's sound advice. Without putting words in your mouth, that kind of sits alongside the whole diagnosis and research piece, doesn't it, really? And probably doesn't happen anywhere near as much as it should.
Yeah, I mean, it's just so obvious when you actually go and. I know Mark Ritson would call it ethnography. It's a big old word, but it's just the most rewarding experience to see what their world is actually like, and what you've got to cut through, and what problems you actually solve for them. It's really rewarding. I wish I'd done it more. I've not done it. I've done quite a bit, but I wish I'd done a lot more.
So number 2 then, Brian, if you could banish one thing from the industry, what would it be and why?
Oh man, there's loads. I got in a massive debate with somebody recently about what the word engagement even means. I'd have to put that one in the hurt locker. If anybody if my boss had heard, if the COO or the CFO here had heard me having that conversation, they'd have thought, what a dick. How the market gets so wound up. So I guess jargon, but no, I'm going to go back to that whole absolutism thing where people insist that their way is the best or the only way. And there's a simple kind of reason for it. But, back to my world and my peer group of B2B marketers, some of us work in tiny companies, some work in huge companies, some work in startups, some work in, 100-year-old businesses. Some are in trouble, some are fast growing, some of us have got 10 bob halfpenny to spend, some have got 10 million. There's so much diversity. For anybody that says there is only one way to do things, it's just not believable to me, because of the diversity of clientele that we've got, and problems that we're fixing for people, and how you do things in Colombian B2B has got to be different from how you do it in Cairo B2B or in Cardiff. So yeah, it's that kind of absolutism. I mean, there's loads of things that's nuts about our industry. I heard there's a new fad, scrappy marketing, and a new one, performance marketing. People keep giving stuff labels. I could go on about this forever. Yeah. Stop me, let's move on. Sorry, dude. Yeah. I sound like you.
You're not that bad, mate. Any books that you would recommend to our listeners?
Do you know what? I just finished a really good book by a guy called, is it Tim Harford, The Undercover Economist? It's not a marketing book, but I really enjoyed it. It's not probably for everybody. I just wanted to learn a little bit about economics, because everyone denigrates it so much these days. But you know what? I'm not going to recommend it. But can I go off piste? I'm gonna have a bit of a crack at Cannes. And, there was a lot of wordiness and truthiness, I think people now call it, coming out of Cannes, and it all felt quite serious. And I think culture has evolved. I think there is a serious nature to the world we live in at the moment. But I think the fun sounds like it's gone out of Cannes. And I just want to, rather than a book, I'm just going to invite a few people down there. Just go out and have a gin and tonic and go and have a night out in Wakefield, or go to a car boot sale, or go listen to a gig or something, and just put a smile on your face and look at the real world, what real challenges people around us are facing, and let's just inject a bit of real life and humour back into some of the things. I wrote a blog post about a night out I had recently with 19 topless men in a pub in West Yorkshire, little town. I
read it. Yeah. No, tell us. It was great.
Yeah, little town in Rastrick, and I didn't intentionally go out with them. They just happened to be in a pub that I needed to be in for certain reasons, and got chatting to these lads who were quite well lubricated. And I actually do believe that purpose has a really important role to play within our businesses, and I think it has some potential in a lot of our businesses in terms of how we position ourselves in the market. But a night out with 19 fairly large, semi-naked Yorkshiremen, reminds you actually what the real world is like, and problems one lad was having with his washing machine, and choices of lager that they were drinking, and preferences for peanuts or crisps, and it's just a really nice night just to remind yourself what life's really like. And I think a lot of people in advertising marketing probably need to get out and see the world again, go out and have a night out in Pittsburgh or a night out in Seoul, and just see the world for how it really is. And again, I'm not actually anti-brand purpose. I think it's got a role to play for some businesses, but not all. And what I didn't really believe with, I'm not a big fan of that every single customer in the world automatically starts with why. That's the bit that I'm questioning, not brand purpose, really. Yeah, that was a long night, I'm telling you, though.
Headache in the morning?
Little bit, yeah, little bit. I'm not a good. I'm not a strong drinker, as they would say.
So, as you probably know, Brian, we always like to dedicate every show to somebody, and we bestow or hospital pass that honour, depending on your view, to our guest, who also has to give their reason why. So, would you do the honours?
Quick bit of respect to my wife, who's my absolute hero. She absolutely genuinely is, Rachel. She's the best thing in my life. But I'm for the purpose of this, because it's a professional podcast, I'm going to dedicate it to a couple of folks I haven't spoken to in many years. A lady called Caroline Hay and a guy called Andy Rawnsley, who I worked for back at AT&T, and they gave me my first break. And I probably just want to say thank you to them. I doubt they'll hear this, but I was really grateful. They supported me moving from a software analyst path to a marketing career. So yeah, great. Thank you, both of you hear this.
That's a great dedication. Thank you. So as a final call to action then, if everyone listening heads over to this episode online, they can see everything that we've discussed and all the associated links. How else can we get more Brian Macreadie?
I'm on LinkedIn as Brian Macreadie. Yeah, I've never really checked if there's more than one of us. But yeah, LinkedIn's pretty decent, and I'm on Twitter quite a bit at BM Marketer. So yeah, come hang out, and I'm sorry if I tweet lots of nonsense.
Apologies in advance. Well, thank you for joining us, Brian. It's been a real pleasure and a privilege to talk to you. Yeah,
thanks a lot, buddy. I really appreciate being asked, and I hope I didn't offend too many people.
Time will tell.
Only time will tell.
And a final thank you to everyone listening and supporting the show. If you've enjoyed this episode, please do take a look back at previous guests. We've been really blessed with some wonderfully talented, intelligent, creative minds. Please continue to get in touch with the show with your guest requests, questions to put to those guests. We've had dozens of those in recently. It's easy to find Gasp online. We are on Instagram at CTApod, or simply email the show via hello@calltoaction.co. I can't get no call to
action. I can't get no call to action, but I try, and I try, and I try, and I try. I can't get no call to action. Oh, I can't get no call to action. Yeah.
There's only one thing. Oh, cunty fucking bollocks. Oh, shit, fuck.